Hello,
Hello.
everyone, and good morning, and welcome to the very first episode for the March lineup, which is, of course, our very first Writers Hub episode. Now, many of you may know me. I am Gabriel Garcia, the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today for our very first episode for the month of March is a returning Wandering Scribe alumni. Now, if you remember this guest, she is an author, she is a writer, she is an actor. And last time we were having her on the show, we were talking about her then debut novel, Black Bug, which is now in the process of getting a sequel for a 2027 release. And in this episode, viewers and listeners, we're going to be talking about emotions in storytelling, which I am very excited to talk about. And joining us back here on the show, let's give a huge round of applause to Wandering Scribe alumni, author, writer, and actor and director, Anna Brenneisen. Anna, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome, Anna. Awesome. So excited to have you back here on the show. Now, before we begin, would you like to give our viewers a little life update of what you've been up to since the last time you were on the show?
So I've been working on the sequel for Black Bug. I'm still writing it, but I'm really excited about sharing how it turns out next year.
Awesome. Awesome. Any other projects beyond Black Bug, or has that kind of been your main focus at the moment?
I've been doing other projects like music stuff that I do as well. But Black Bug is like my main concern at the moment.
All right, nice, nice. Well, I am so excited to have you here back on the show to talk about this subject, and I'm really, really intrigued to hear your insights to some of these questions. So we'll just begin with the very first question of our discussion, and that is, what do you think authors can use in terms of techniques to invoke strong emotions in their writing?
I think first and foremost are personal experiences. And also I like working with music, like maybe having a playlist. I think that's something that helps me a lot. But I think it just depends on your vibe because some people just like writing in complete silence. So maybe you can draw your inspiration from other scenes in stories, like in movies or books. Maybe like watching a scene before writing that helps you get in the right place to write it. Um, and I think also something that I like to do a lot is like aligning first. So then when I'm writing the scene, I already know like that the structure works and I can just focus on like on the emotions and everything. But I think also planning ahead, like what do you want to achieve with this scene? What kind of emotions do you want your readers to feel? And perhaps even write like keywords that not that you have to like use those keywords in your writing, but maybe those keywords mean something to you and they just trigger you and the emotion that you want to convey.
That's very, very true. And I do like how you talked about, music and film as being some kind of inspiration to the emotions, because I do that myself for my own writing. I'll listen to like either a particular song or a score in a film to see, okay, what is the scene trying to convey? And can I do something similar in my own writing? Because I think, as we're going to talk later in this discussion, evoking emotion among many things is a very difficult thing to do, or rather show, in storytelling. So,
Yeah.
and for this question, can you use, without spoiling too much, a character from Black Bug that really exemplifies this?
Sorry, you just kind of froze for me. Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, of course, of course.
Yeah.
So my second question, and I would like to ask you is, how can understanding character backstories enhance the emotional depth of a story? And can you use a character from Black Bug as an example?
Yeah, sure. I think you can write a character you don't know, let alone know how they express themselves, knowing how their emotions work. What should they feel like in a situation? So I think learning why they are like what they are like today is because of the choices they made from the past and so many things. And I think one of the characters in my book, I think like Sam, the main character, I feel like she's just been through a lot of like trauma and rejection, and that's why like she's very closed off. She's not very much like she doesn't like interacting socially very much because she feels like maybe people are judging her. So I feel like all of that is from the trauma that she got from the bullying and everything.
Interesting, interesting. And kind of following to that, in what ways do you think the setting influences the emotional tone of a story? Because setting and the atmosphere also act as a character in and of itself.
Yeah, it's true. I think setting just translates the mood that you want to convey. So I think just the setting by itself won't do the trick. Like I think sometimes people rely too much on like these external things, but I think it can amplify. You know, it's one of the layers that you can use to create emotion. So like I was writing like a funeral scene, and then it starts raining in the funeral, so it adds a dramatic layer to it. But if I just wrote like a very plain scene and just added some rain to it, it just wouldn't work really. So I think it's just combining elements is so important.
Yes, and I think when it comes to like the setting, you want to show, but definitely not tell. You want the setting and the scene to convey the emotion itself. And again, as we are going to be talking about, it is very interesting how the setting can evoke so many different emotions as opposed to one singular emotion. A scene
Yeah.
could also be happy, but also sad. It could also make someone angry or depressed. It all depends on, the techniques you use to really convey what do you want the reader to experience at that particular point in time.
Yeah.
And normally in scenes, you also have some dialogue. So, how can dialogue be crafted to convey emotions effectively without being overtly dramatic? And I definitely think that is a big struggle for authors who want to convey that emotional scene by adding too much dialogue, too much fluff, and making it overtly dramatic and kind of taking away from the scene.
Yeah, so I think it all comes down to how would you speak to a real person in real life. I think when we're writing, it's easy to be like too poetic, and unless your character is like Shakespeare or something, it doesn't make sense for him to like express themselves like so perfectly. So I think it's about being very like how's your character like in writing accordingly to that. So it's balance. Balance is key.
Yes, balance is key. And on this topic of balance, one thing I've also found very fascinating, and I'm going to use an example from a book I've read, The Coward and the Warrior duology by Stephen Arion. That author is able to convey a range of emotions over the series of chapters. The pacing was so good. I mean, you see this man who has severe PTSD, who was a young boy, young child who went on a quest. He joined a traveling adventure band to seek glory and fame and have the songs written about him. When he comes back, he's completely changed. He's suffering from PTSD. He doesn't want to get involved, but stories are written about him. Everyone sees him as a hero, and he's thrust into that. But the pacing of, the emotions that you see the character in is so really good, which kind of leads into the next question, Anna, which is how important is it to have good pacing that leads to emotional buildup throughout the story?
Yeah, I think pacing is all about the intensity of the scene. So I'm thinking like if I'm writing an action scene, like the characters running, there are explosions and things fighting, you wanna like faster pacing, I believe, because you want to immerse the reader in the same state that your character is. Your character is like rushing, so it doesn't make much sense to have a slower pacing, at least in my point of view. And I think when you want the reader to like linger more in the scene, or you need them to pay attention to something, some information that is being given that is very important, or you just simply want them to be more reflective and ponder about more emotional subjects, maybe, then you just should go for a slower pacing.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Very, very true, Anna. And this kind of goes into not just the overall pacing of the story, but also the subplots as well. Because you do have the main character that has their own emotional journey, but you also have the side characters that have their own journey as well.
Yeah.
And in your opinion, how can authors balance plot development with emotional resonance that at the end of the day keeps the reader engaged? Because that's what we want as authors. We want our readers to be engaged throughout the story and not lose them at a certain plot point if the emotional buildup falls flat.
Yeah, I think one of the things is, balance is so key for like all the aspects of emotional writing. And I think it's just so important when we are writing to not just focus on like perfect structure and like, oh, look how my writing is so great, and because it's just so rational. And if you just lose the reader because you're not connecting emotionally, and that will happen if you don't push yourself to write something that is emotionally interesting, then you just kind of lose them. So I think what's really important is to keep that in mind, and remember, like, why do we read books? Because we want to feel something, we want to experience something that's like out of this world. We want to see, like, especially in like fantasy and sci-fi, we want to dive deep in the magic of the story. So I think if it's not working in that way, then there's no point in reading a book that is just, that it just sounds too much like not fiction.
Yes, 100%. And it comes again to this balance of you want the reader to be, immersed in the story as a way to escape real life. We also want to invoke some aspects of real life that again keep that reader engaged. And that comes down to, what triggers an emotional response. I'm sure you've seen a lot of books that have trigger warnings in their stories that let the reader know from the get-go, hey, this book has this, this, and this. You're going to feel this, and sometimes it's very helpful and that, really gets the reader engaged. Other times it deters readers and unfortunately says, I can't read a story like that, which, is fair. Everyone has their own preferences when it comes to certain trigger uses in storytelling. In your opinion, Anna, what are some of the most common emotional triggers that resonate with a wide audience? And are there some trigger warnings, light versions in Black Book that some of your readers have picked up?
I think there are many triggers. It's like triggers are not honestly necessarily like a bad thing, like a bad emotion. But I feel like social connection is like an emotional trigger. Like if you're writing about romance or friendship, things that are very natural. And also I think overcoming obstacles is also a emotional trigger because it's something that we all identify with. There, that's why there are like so many underdog stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also pain is a very recurring theme, like because grief and or physical illness is something that a lot of people can't understand. Even if you're not going through that, you just can relate to some kind of pain and put yourself in the shoes of your character. And in my book, I think the emotional triggers, I think there's a lot of mental health stuff that is like discussed, especially because the main character is very like depressive, is going through a lot of emotions like that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think when it comes to writing emotional scenes or just having emotional writing in our story, it's definitely a learning experience, especially if we are going to include a lot of sensitive material. I'll use an example of one of my books, Michael Last Angel of Earth, where it is a high epic fantasy story, but in the first few chapters, especially, the main character, Michael, known as Barjan, suffers with depression and suicidal tendencies. And I
Mm-hmm.
knew I wanted to approach that scene with respect, still be accurate to what is, a more accurate and correct depiction of someone suffering from these tendencies and not have it be forced or anything. And a lot
Yeah.
of people have loved that depiction of, you know, a character who is suffering from possibly some case of PTSD, some depression, has suicidal tendencies. It's shown in the beginning. I mean, he actively tries to take the sword, and his shadow is egging him on to just end himself, but he
Mm.
doesn't. And you definitely see his journey go throughout. Like his shadow is constantly nagging him and like saying, like, you can't do this. Why are we doing this? A lot of readers really enjoyed that. And this kind of goes into another question, Anna, which is how can authors ensure that their emotional writing feels authentic and not forced? Because readers are definitely going to pick up if it's forced or not, if it's, you're trying to just put that in, even though it has no bearing or use or purpose in the storytelling.
Yeah, I think it's similar to the dialogue thing that I said. I think it's just asking the question, is this how I naturally would express myself in real life? Because I think even when we're writing fiction, we need to have this sort of grounding layers of reality. Even if it's something very fantastical, I think it's just important to keep that in mind. And I don't know, I think one of the tips that I also think is very valuable is just reading aloud, like reading what you're writing aloud, because then you can have this notion if like something is striking you as odd, and then you can just change it.
Yes. And we may have already answered this before, but maybe we can go a little more in depth, Anna. What strategies do you think can be employed to create relatable characters that the readers can empathize with and have that emotional connection?
I think the most personal is the most creative. I think that's like a quote from Scorsese or something. And I think it's just so true because when we write very specific things that maybe we went through or someone we know went through, and just very specific, the reader is, like not all the readers, but some of them, we read and be like, oh, me too. And that's when you generate that emotional connection with the reader because of these very specific things. They realize that they are not alone, and I think that's what it all comes down really to, like writing anything. You want to connect right with your reader, so make sure they know that um you got them, you feel it too.
Mhm. Yes, and as you said before earlier, Anna, a lot of authors pull from their own personal experiences and interweave it into their own storytelling to show that connection, to show that genuine, to show that authenticity. And from that point, how can an author reflect on their own emotional experiences to enhance their storytelling, but also realize they are telling the character story, they are not telling their story, unless that is the main point.
Yeah, I think one thing that I really believe in is write where it hurts most. Like use your pain and the trauma and everything that like you went through as a fuel for your writing. So I think that's just very helpful. Um, and I don't know, I think it just makes things more real and relatable. And again, referring to the previous answer, connecting with your reader.
Yes. And I definitely also think to add on to that, I think when we write stories, we ourselves are also in an emotional state when we write it. Because I'm pretty sure, Anna, if you wrote Black Bug now, just the first book now in your life currently, it may not be the same kind of story, the same emotional story that you wrote, all those years ago. It would be two different stories. Yes, kind of follows the same character, but the emotional uh relationship behind it is very different. That's the same in the sense of like an author who starts a book at one point in their life, they put it away and they try to continue it, but they realize I'm not the same person as I was before when I started, writing this. Much older, I'm in a different headspace. It's so very, very interesting how just subtle aspects of who we are can impact the emotional language of storytelling, and not just for us, but for the reader as well.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about a lot of things too before, when it comes down to scenes and dialogue, which also help convey emotions. But what about symbolism? How do you think the use of symbolism can enhance the emotional impact of a story?
I love symbolism because it's subtle and it just conveys an idea of that, like yelling it in the reader's face. So I think that's important because you want to keep a little mystery, I think. And when you just hand the equation but you don't like solve it for the reader, that's when you are in that sweet spot.
Definitely, definitely. I also think symbolism can also be used to, as we talked about earlier, it is an emotional buildup. Like if there's a certain thing that is tied to the story, like an item or some symbol, whether it's, spiritual or a physical item, it is so very, very interesting
Yeah.
of how it can be used to convey certain things. Now, this one I've been seeing a lot as a reader, and I would like to hear your insight into it, Anna. And this is the debate of emotional techniques when it comes to first person and third person storytelling. Now, in your opinion, what are the benefits and or drawbacks of using first person versus third person perspectives to convey emotions? Naturally, first person is going to be, you the author are speaking as one of the characters, and you're going to be in that character's head a little bit easier as opposed to third person, which is an omnipotent narrator who's just reading the character's journey, from afar. They both have their strengths and weaknesses, but I'm wondering, in your opinion, does one convey emotion better than the other?
Yeah, I think they're just, I wouldn't say one is better than the other. I think they're just different and can convey different things. I myself personally, as a reader, like to read in first person. And I actually wrote my book in first person. And I think when you do that, what I like about it is that the character becomes like a friend. You can really dive deep in that one character, but the downside is that you're like limited to like their POV, what they think and how they perceive other characters as well. So they're not exactly reliable. That's the thing about first person readers. You just don't really know what is truly real or what is just in their head. And what I like about third person is just, I feel like there's like a larger range of emotions because you have more characters to explore. You can see it like in a big picture, so it's not so compromised.
Yes, absolutely. And now, kind of going into the realm of characters again, this is one I find very interesting, and that is a character arc. And I'm sure you definitely agree, people, whether it's readers or viewers, get emotionally engaged in a character's arc, their journey, because, it's just so fascinating how we can be involved in a character's journey and just see how they unfold. And I'll use a character that a lot of people have a lot of comments on, and that is, of course, the character of Jaime Lannister from the Game of Thrones TV series. Everybody was invested in Jaime's character arc throughout the entirety of the series. And a lot of people were very vocal when they believed that, oh, they ruined his character. They ruined his whole journey to be this honorable man, and he just went back to being who he was before. But what a lot of people don't realize is that a failed character is also an arc in and of itself. I mean, there are a lot of classic characters from Greek tales, Roman traditions that are just like that. They have all this buildup, but then they are taken down by their own hubris, their own vices. So, in that regard, how does the arc of a character's emotional journey contribute to the overall narrative as well as the engagement of the reader?
Well, I think if it's a character driven story, especially, I think the very core of the narrative is the character's arc. So I think when the character makes choices that are good or bad, it will directly influence on the outcome of the plot if the character driven story. So I think it's just important to know where you're going before you start writing it. That's why I think there's an amazing book called Writing Character Arcs, and it displays exactly that, different types of arcs, because there's like the downfall arc, and it just doesn't end really well for the character. But it doesn't mean it's a lesser arc of, an arc where the character is like, winning in life, sort of like that idea.
Yes, 100% very true. Now let's talk about a story's conflict and the climax, because those also have a lot of emotions tied to it. And I'm very intrigued of how authors are able to convey, you know, the emotional response to the climax or the conflict, but not getting lost. So, in what ways can a story's conflict reflect deeper emotional themes, but also, again, this balancing of you're balancing the conflict, the climax, the big battle, no matter what it may be, whether it be internal struggle, physical struggle, some kind of conflict, but it's balanced with emotional writing, but also may reveal some deeper emotional themes.
Yeah, I think, like in my book, what I like to do is make the external conflict and the inner conflict collide. So when there are a billion things going on the outside, they will also bring forth emotions in the character that would just show um, the the depth of what they're going through, like internally. So it's like it's not just separate things, it's like two things, but they can collide. And I think that's when things get really interesting, because when a billion obstacles are like coming against your character, you see how they will react will show a lot of how they are like on the inside. Like a character who's more mentally stable than the other will react differently. So I think that's just important to keep in mind, not treat as two separate things, but maybe combine them.
Yes, 100%. And in that regard, how can authors effectively use imagery to invoke specific emotions to their readers? Because sometimes I've seen a lot of storytelling, especially when it gets to the climax, of imagery being used as well, whether it's a character's face, whether it's a scene that's happening at the same time. I want to hear your thoughts on this.
I think it all comes down to like thinking visually and using the five, making the reader use their five senses, So do a lot of description that doesn't like name the feeling, but describes what the character is feeling. So it's the classic show don't tell.
Yes, and on this notion of show don't tell, there's something that a lot of people really, really like and have been analyzing more recently, and that is A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. More recently, the final episode of season one. And there is a particular scene in question where it is the young Prince Aegon, who, after the death of Baelor Breakspear Targaryen, he is just so overcome with grief and he sees himself. Well, his hair is starting to grow back because he shaved his hair down so that he doesn't recognize his Targaryen ancestry. And he actually goes into his brother's room, Aerion Brightflame, and tries to kill him. And that scene is so suspenseful. It's like, oh shoot, is he actually going to do it? And then at the very end, you see Makar, their father, walk in, and he's just distraught, and he's going through his own, internal struggle that he is responsible for killing his brother accidentally. He's a kinslayer, and he doesn't want that to happen to his son. And that scene is so beautiful because he doesn't say anything. He just walks over to his son, places a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, and his son, his facial expression, which is so good, just melts away, and he just leans back and he's able to grieve. He's able to grieve and make our. He doesn't scold his son. He doesn't do anything. He is just a father in that point. And I absolutely love that because that's a classic example of showing the emotions, but not telling us. And I would like to know what effective techniques can authors use to show rather than tell a character's emotions, much like that scene in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms with Makar and Egg Targaryen?
Yeah, I think using less adjectives and adverbs, and also focusing more on metaphors and descriptions. And I think also allowing the characters to just, have those quieter moments. I think when everything's just dialogue and dialogue, and we just don't have those precious moments like the ones you described, I think we just lose a lot.
Absolutely, 100%. And I love that scene just because of the subtle face changes. Like you can see, for those that have not seen that show, I highly recommend watching it. It is such a good example of character arcs, character emotions, journeys in such a very small setting because it's at a tournament, and it's just so beautiful. Another great scene that I find very interesting and I've used for research now is where Makar is talking to the character Dunk after, he tells him that my brother's dead, and it's like, people are going to say that I meant to kill my brother. I didn't. The gods know the truth, but elders are going to keep whispering. I'm going to hear the whisper to the day I die. And you see him just utterly traumatized. He is guilt ridden. He knows he's never going to forget this. He is going to be haunted by this act for the rest of his life. And I just love the nuances. I mean, you can just see it. And I think a lot of people should do almost like we talked about before earlier is when it comes to media, film, music, research, use those as research tools to figure out, okay, what emotions are they trying to convey and how can I use that similarly in my own writing as well. And what I found very fascinating is that in the scenes before, there were a lot of flashbacks and memories that helped, reiterate those emotions. So, on that note, Anna, how can flashbacks and memories be utilized to deepen a emotional understanding in a story?
Yeah, I think it's important to not overuse it, um,
Mm,
because you want to keep a little mystery, regarding the character's past and everything, and you just don't need to like give the reader all the information. I think that's just a bit tiring. And one thing that it does, it shows a bit more on the why the character is what it is like in the present moment. So I think it just adds that layer of depth and connection to the character.
yes. And on that connection to the character, one thing I also find very interesting, and we haven't talked about yet, is relationships. I know a lot of people are very invested in relationships, especially romanticy, romance, dark romance. Everyone who is interested in those stories know that romance and emotions tied to the characters is integral to the story. And I also like how certain genres of romance can invoke different reactions from different readers. So, in your opinion, Anna, how does the how do these relationships between characters influence the emotional dynamics of a narrative? And does it change depending on the genre or subgenre the authors write in?
I think you can pretty much use this for everything. What I believe that works is having different personalities, because
Mm,
you want, because like different personalities equal different perspectives. So if you have characters that are basically all the same, then you're not really going to have those like dynamic shifts that are so important. I think a great example of this is like in the show Wednesday. We have Wednesday, she's like all dark and
yes.
stuff, and but we also have Enid, and she's like total opposite, and the relationship works exactly because it adds different perspectives. So I think that's the kind of thing that we're going for.
Yes, it's almost like what is it, the friends argument where you want the characters to be not completely polar opposites, but they bring out the best in each other for a certain thing. That's why if you look at the characters in Friends, normally there's like these guys would have nothing in common with each other. They shouldn't be friends, and yet they are. Why is that the case? Why are these completely random people who have no business being friends with each other? Granted, some of them have known some more than others, but why? What do they have that builds that connection, builds that relationship? And I definitely think what can highlight this is again the friend argument, which is make the characters have some flaw that another character can help build up, and vice versa. Because you will definitely have genuine and authentic relationships that the readers are going to recognize. And that authenticity is again something we come back to because at the end, emotional writing is tied to authenticity. You want it to be something that is genuine and not forced. And yeah, it is 100% true. Now, something that you mentioned earlier, Anna, which now we can probably go a little more in detail, is the role of music and sound play. Now, that's typically found in, radio dramas, scripts, and other works like that. Not typically found in a lot of, traditional writing, not unless you go into the realm of audiobooks where you could have that feature. In your opinion, what role does music or sound play in enhancing the emotional experience of a story, especially in adaptations? Because, again, audiobooks have the luxury of adding some music or sounds to heighten certain scenes in storytelling.
Yeah, I think audiobooks and movies as well, when we have this type of like adaptations, it's interesting because it adds an immersive quality to the narrative, and I think that's just so amazing. It's like images, they just have sound. Like when you look at a picture of like the Shire or something from Lord of the Rings, you just instantly start hearing like the concerning hobbits music play. So I think it's just it's funny how songs and music and like other sounds, like they just immerse us to brings us like in a deeper way, in a deeper connection to the story. And it's also interesting because in your everyday life you can listen to like soundtracks of movies and soundtracks of like audiobooks or something, songs that play in this type of medias, and you can just bring that to your daily life as well. So it's like a part of you, that a part of your like daily life, that you can just insert that in, because you're not like gonna read the book every day or like watch the movie every day, but you can have a little bit of the experience that you got from that through the music. And I think that is just so very interesting. And I think also like in books, something that I like to do is create playlists. Like for my book, there is the character playlist, and the reader can listen to the same songs that she's listening to while you're reading. And that's something that I just like to do because music is very important for my character. So maybe for some characters, it just doesn't make sense to have that, but in this case, it just did. And I also like using music for me for writing, even if it's not in the story.
I've heard of that as well. I've heard of a lot of authors making playlists for their books or for their characters, which I find very interesting of how they're able to find songs that tie to the story or tie to the overall characters. And there was something I was just realizing when you said that, Anna, about music and sounds and storytelling. It almost goes back to the argument of as kids, we enjoyed things, growing up, and when we rewatch it with a newer perspective, or as adults, it takes us back to a place in time, nostalgia. That's what I'm thinking of,
Yeah.
and it's just so interesting how we can love something from our childhood so many years ago, and when we look at it, it's like, oh wow, I now see the characters in a completely different light, and their emotional journey is just so interesting, which I would like to just talk a little about that as well. Like, do you think that is the sign of a good author when they're able to add emotions, or not emotions, when they're able to write emotional dialogue or language of a character that a reader may think one way when they're at, you say, that age group for that book, and when they read it much later, they have a different perspective and see the real underlying meaning that the author was trying to convey all those years ago?
Yeah, I think it certainly is very nice when we have these moments, because as we grow older, we also like have different perspectives in life. So I think when we used to watch like a movie growing up when we were like kids, and then we are older now, and then we watch it again, we see things that we didn't see before. I think there are just layers that, and I think that's just interesting. It's not just like an age gap, but also like when you watch a movie more than once, you kind of start noticing different things about it.
Mm-hmm.
There, yeah, like there are things that you just completely miss when you watch it like once. But when I really like a movie, I like watching it many, many, many times, and every time is a different experience because I'm looking at something different.
Very true. Very true. Now, before we wrap this incredible discussion up, there was a one last question, as well as a secret question that I kept hidden for this discussion. Now, the second to last question I wanted to ask you, and it's something that we haven't talked about at all. We talked about a lot of emotions, but the one emotion we haven't really expressed in our discussion is the role of humor in storytelling. There's a lot of stories throughout history that are described as humorous or fables that have humor in them. And I would like to know, in your opinion, how can humor be integrated into emotional writing without undermining the seriousness of the narrative or that particular scene?
Yeah, I think so. It's about balance again and not overusing it, and less is more, because if you have, even if you have like the Joker kind of character that is always making jokes and everything, if he never gets a moment where he displays something different, we are just gonna get tired, because like punchline after punchline doesn't make really a good effect. So I think it's just, you know, if you want the joke to pop, you have to allow other types of emotions to go on first. So when the joke comes, it has like this effect that you want it to have.
So it's almost like the argument as we were talking about before about, conflict and emotion. There has to be this nice balance of the two. You want to highlight the scene that's happening, the conflict, but if you want to have emotional undertones and themes, you can, but you have to do so respectfully and a way that makes sense, that doesn't seem forced. And I think at the end of the day, throughout this whole discussion, Anna, which has been really, really good, I think a lot of people can take a lot of things from our discussion. And to cap off this amazing discussion of writing, emotion in storytelling, what do you want, or what do you hope aspiring writers and authors and even poets can take away from our discussion?
Yeah, I think so. The personal experiences are so valuable. What you think could have been like the worst thing that happened to you, or the trauma and the pain that you went through, it actually can be used for something good and greater than yourself and greater than your very own pain. So I think it's just about using it as fuel for your creativity, and allow yourself to express those difficult emotions, because other people out there may be going through this same thing that you went through before and now have overcome it and everything. So use that to help others relate to you and to things that to your healing, to the things that you want to express.
Beautifully said, Anna. Beautifully said. And on that note, viewers and listeners, we conclude our very first episode for the month of March here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. Want to give a huge thank you to my friend Anna for coming back on the show and joining us today. Anna, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect, as well as purchase a copy of Black Bug? And besides, of course, working on the sequel as well as other projects, are you going to be doing any in-person events to help promote Black Bug, any conferences or any other collaborations with other creatives?
At the moment, I don't have any in-person things scheduled, but I'm definitely open to that. I do. You can find Black Bug in Amazon and Kobo. It's an ebook version for now. And you can find me on social media at Anna Brenneisen, and also my YouTube channel that is the same, at Anna Brenneisen.
Excellent. I will link all those down below in the description of this video. And if you'd like to see Anna's first appearance on the show, I will also link it up here. I urge you all to go and check it out. It was an amazing episode and learned a lot from Anna. And I wish her the very best on her journey from one author to another. And if you'd like to see her back on the show for a follow-up author interview to help promote the sequel to Black Bug. Like this video, comment, and subscribe. And as always, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, signing out. Wish you all a wonderful morning wherever you are in the world. Happy Sunday, everybody, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Take care, and bye-bye.